My wife betrayed me. We tried to conceive a child for 3 months, and when we did, I took a DNA test and found out that Noah is not my son. Oh man, where do I start with my marriage? My wife Hannah and I have been together for almost 2 decades. It's hard to believe our 20th anniversary is approaching on November 5th. Looking back, I wouldn't change a thing about our life together. Sure, we've had our struggles, but making up always made it worth it. That was our rhythm. We faced a tough time early on, around our 2nd year, but after that, things mostly went smoothly. We married young me at 21, Hannah at 19. We grew up next door to each other and had known each other since we were kids. It felt natural to marry, especially since my older brother Aaron had married Hannah's sister Claire a year earlier. Aaron and Claire had a baby within their 1st year, but we struggled. We went through various tests despite doctors telling us to relax and let nature take its course. But Hannah's mom, Martha, was relentless, always pushing us to start a family. Martha was determined to have a grandson after raising all girls. The test results were inconclusive. Hannah was perfectly fine, but I had a slightly low sperm count. I never really understood the specifics. The doctors told us it wasn't a big deal and that everything would be okay. They advised us to be patient and assured us that we would have a baby when the time was right. Despite our attempts to be patient, the pressure was hard on our marriage. Thankfully, we didn't have to wait too long. In our 3rd year, Hannah gave birth just as the doctor had predicted. Emma came into our lives, a beautiful baby girl. It was such a relief. From that point, things settled and our marriage grew stronger. We relaxed, and soon after, Hannah became pregnant again, and we had Alex, a son. The family was over the moon. This didn't mean we loved our daughter any less, but having a son felt special. I was the first in our family to have a son, and I proudly told my brother. He just smiled and said to give him time. Sure enough, the next year they had their first son too. 8 months later, we had another son, Noah. It was like waiting for a bus-nothing for ages, and then several come at once. With 2 sons and a daughter, our house was always bustling. Even when Hannah's other sisters got married, they became part of our close-knit family. It was wonderful for the kids, and we always had help when we needed it. From my perspective, the other couple seemed just as happy as Hannah and me, enjoying the simple joys of family life. We faced a few hurdles, like when Aaron had a work accident. I was right there with him as they transfused my blood into him. He recovered, and I was fine too. We often joked about being true blood brothers after that. As our 20th anniversary approached, we wanted to celebrate big. Aaron and Claire had a fantastic party for their anniversary the year before, so we decided to do something similar. We booked a private room at a local hotel for a big family gathering. Then there was Emma, our stunning 17-year-old daughter, a younger version of her mother. She had glossy dark brown hair and striking green eyes that always drew attention. She was slim, with nice legs, and features that a father shouldn't think about too much. She had a steady stream of boyfriends, and our house always seemed full of them, but she was sensible, so we didn't worry too much. Alex, on the other hand, was a lot like Miss Solidly Built, which suited him well. He loved rugby, just like Aaron and I did at his age. At almost 16, he was already a key player for his school's rugby team. And then there was Noah, the youngest. Maybe he was having a hard time not being as athletic as Alex or as popular as Emma. Poor Noah wasn't having the best time. He was very smart, probably the smartest of the 3, and excelled in school. He was just a typical, confusing teenager. That day, maybe I should have been more understanding. Maybe I should have ignored the mess he left on the dining table. Maybe I should have cleaned it up myself, but I didn't. "You're not going anywhere until you clean up that mess, Noah," I said firmly. "I'll do it later," he replied, sulking. "You'll do it now, Noah," I insisted. "Why are you always picking on me?" he shouted back, losing his temper. "I'm not," I snapped. "You're part of this family and you need to follow the rules like everyone else." "Who's going to make me?" Noah almost cried, really losing it. "I will," I retorted, my patience wearing thin. "I'm your father and you'll do as I say." "My father, huh?" he yelled. "You sure about that?" I was stunned. My next words caught in my throat. "Sorry, Dad," Noah quickly said, his face pained. "I didn't mean it. I'll clean up right now." He looked away and hurriedly cleared the table, gathering his things. Within minutes, the table was spotless, and he rushed out without another word, leaving me in a whirlwind of thoughts, fearing my world was falling apart. Noah had always been different from the other two, more serious, studious, but less outgoing. I often wondered why and had talked to Hannah about it, but she brushed it off, saying I was overthinking. Was I? What had made Noah say that? If he had just yelled in anger and left, I would have been upset, but that would be it. But he was so quick to apologize and retract his words. Why? What did he know that I didn't? Oh no, I didn't want to consider the troubling thoughts racing through my mind. My first instinct was to confront Hannah and demand answers, but what would that solve? What could I even say? I couldn't just accuse Hannah of cheating on me. If she hadn't, she would never forgive me for doubting her, and if she had, she would just deny it. Besides, it had been over 16 years since we started our family. Did that even matter now? My stomach churned with anxiety and I felt sick, uncertain if I even had a reason to worry. What a dreadful day it was. Then it hit me: blood types. Without hesitation, I went to our study and found the kids' medical records. Emma, Alex, and Noah were all O positive, just like me. I felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. Blood types didn't tell the whole story. The fact that they all shared my blood type could just be a coincidence and didn't confirm that Noah was really my son. I needed something more definitive: DNA testing. I couldn't believe I was considering such a drastic measure based on one angry comment from Noah. I was probably overreacting, but Noah's avoidance during dinner that evening only fueled my concerns. "What's wrong with Noah?" Hannah asked, noticing his odd behavior too. "No clue," I replied, shrugging. "Do you guys know?" I asked Emma and Alex. They shook their heads, seemingly oblivious. "Has he been upset about anything?" I prodded, but again they shook their heads. Once the kids left the table, I gathered the courage to ask Hannah. Noah seemed so different from the other two. "Hannah, any idea why?" "Let's not dwell on that, Ryan," she said, getting up to clear the dishes. "He's just a bit deeper than the others, end of story." Was she avoiding the topic deliberately, or was she genuinely unconcerned? I couldn't tell. Later that night, I found myself researching DNA testing online. An hour later, my head was swimming with information, but I wasn't much closer to an answer. It wasn't until Monday morning that I found a lab that could do the test. It took me nearly an hour to sort it out, and I did it myself because I couldn't explain to my secretary why I needed a lab test. The lab could do it, but it was expensive, especially if I wanted quick results. I needed to know before risking my marriage. The lab suggested I send samples from all 3 kids and one of my own. Ever tried getting a hair from your grown-up kids? Not easy. With Noah avoiding me, it was the hardest of all, but I managed it. I sent them off and waited. Over the next week, Noah seemed to calm down, probably relieved I hadn't brought up his outburst. We almost reached a point where I felt I could gently talk to him about it, but I thought it best to wait for the results. My wife, of course, continued to be her usual self, and nothing changed in our daily routine. Our love life wasn't at its peak, but I didn't turn her down. Doubts gnawed at me, and even though I tried to hide it from Hannah, I couldn't be intimate with her without wondering if someone else had been involved over our 20 years together. One evening, we had dinner with my brother and his wife. When Aaron and I had a moment alone, I almost confessed my worries to him. We were so alike in many ways, so if someone else fathered Noah, it couldn't have been him. Why was I even thinking this way? I decided not to burden him with my uncertainties. Deep down, I believed he would support me if the results were unfavorable. I remained composed and silent, so much so that Hannah asked a couple of times if everything was all right. I reassured her, saying I had a few things on my mind. She looked concerned briefly, but didn't push further. The results finally arrived. I had them sent to my office to avoid Hannah opening the letter before me. With trembling hands, I read it, trying to grasp its meaning. Would this piece of paper mark the end of my marriage? After reading it, it seemed Noah's results matched mine, and I felt a sense of relief, though the medical terms were like gibberish to me. The report mentioned terms like good match and close match, suggesting my worries were unfounded. Tears welled up in my eyes as I thanked my lucky stars I hadn't shared my fears with Hannah. I decided to make it up to her that evening, maybe take her out to dinner. Upon rereading the covering letter, I noticed the lab wanted me to call them to discuss the results. I figured they just wanted more money from me, but I decided to call anyway. When the phone was answered, I introduced myself. "This is Ryan Johnson. Dr. Parker asked me to call." "Hello, Mr. Johnson," he greeted me. "Have you reviewed the results we sent you?" "Yes," I replied confidently. "It seems my worries about my son Noah were unfounded." "Yes, indeed," he responded, "but it's not quite that simple, I'm afraid. There's more to discuss." My heart sank. "You mean he's not my son?" I stammered. "It's not that, Mr. Johnson," he clarified. "There is less than a 1 in a million chance that he isn't your biological child. I am certain he is your natural-born son." "So Noah is my real son?" I sighed in relief. "Yes, he is, Mr. Johnson." "Then what's the problem?" I asked, feeling uncertain. "It's the other 2 samples you sent in," the doctor said heavily. "What about them?" "The samples from your son's brother and sister," I asked, panic rising. "Well, it seems they are only half-siblings to your youngest son, Mr. Johnson," the doctor explained. "Half-siblings?" I stuttered in shock. "What does that mean?" "It means, Mr. Johnson," he continued, "that it's highly unlikely you are their biological father." The phone slipped from my hand, and the next thing I knew, I was surrounded by my worried coworkers, struggling to regain consciousness. "Give him some space," someone called out as I slowly came to, gasping for breath. "Are you all right, Ryan?" another voice asked. I nodded weakly and attempted to stand, but they helped me back into my chair. They chatted among themselves about work and the office temperature, but all I could think about was the bombshell I had just received. Thankfully, someone arranged for me to be driven home and urged me to take the rest of the day off. When I got home, I was relieved to find the house empty, with Hannah at work and the kids at school. I knew what I had to do next. Dreading the call, I picked up the phone with trembling fingers and dialed the lab's number again. Soon I was speaking with the doctor, apologizing for the abrupt end to our previous conversation. "No worries, Mr. Johnson," he said kindly. "Our postal service can be tricky." I assured him I understood, and he patiently reviewed the test results with me again. "Noah is definitely your son," he confirmed, "but Emma and Alex are unlikely to be your biological children." "But the results showed good or close matches," I pleaded. "Could there be a mistake?" "If we had only 1 sample, we might request another for verification," he explained, "but with 2 samples, the likelihood is nearly certain. While Emma and Alex are full siblings, it's improbable that you're their father. But you said the matches were close," I insisted, grasping at straws. "What does that mean? Do you have a twin or a brother, Mr. Johnson?" the doctor asked cautiously. "Or perhaps another close relative?" "My brother!" I exclaimed, a surge of realization hitting me. "What does my brother have to do with this?" "You'll have to come to your own conclusions, Mr. Johnson," the doctor's voice continued. But I had already stopped listening. My world was falling apart. What was I supposed to do now? End my marriage? Confront my brother? Should I keep this secret and live a lie? I couldn't bear it. And what about Noah? He knew something was wrong, but had the wrong idea. I'd see my son differently now, but I couldn't love Emma and Alex any less. They were still my kids, regardless of their genetics. But Hannah, that was the real issue. How could she betray me like this? And my brother, too. And what about Claire, my sister-in-law? How would she react? How would the rest of the family handle this news? My mind was swirling with so many questions. Oh, God. This was too much to handle, and I wasn't ready to face it. I vaguely remember walking out the front door and wandering down the street, but the next thing I knew, I woke up in the hospital with bandages on my arms. Apparently, I had stumbled into traffic while drunk, but I didn't recall any of it. "Ryan, are you all right?" I turned painfully towards the voice and saw Hannah standing there. "Not really, not yet," I replied. She was still my wife, but I couldn't find the right words. How was I supposed to say, "Hey, honey, I just found out 2 of our kids aren't mine and you've been cheating on me with my brother. How was your day? What's for dinner?" That didn't seem right at all. It turned out my injuries weren't too serious, and they sent me home the next day. I couldn't do much for myself, so I relied on Hannah to take care of me. It gave me time to think and plan, but honestly, it felt like a waste of time because I still didn't know what to do. My main concern now was Noah and the other kids. Whatever decision I made had to be in their best interest, even if it meant sacrificing my own. From then on, Hannah's needs came last. Our 20th anniversary was coming up, and the room was booked for our big dinner. I had to figure things out by then. Within about a week, I was physically back to normal, but mentally, I was still a mess. Everything seemed to go back to routine while I pondered my next move. But Noah was different. He seemed on edge, ready to act out. "You should talk to him, Ryan," Hannah suggested one evening. "I don't know what's bothering him. He doesn't seem to want to talk to me anymore." "I'll have a chat with him," I promised. "Any idea what's going on with him?" she asked. "I've got a few ideas," I said curtly. "Want to talk about them, Ryan?" she asked. "Not really," I replied, taking her by surprise. The chance to talk to Noah came the next day when I found him alone in his room. He couldn't avoid me this time. "Want to talk about what's bothering you, son?" I asked gently. He shook his head, clearly not wanting to open up. "Is it about the other day, Noah? About our relationship?" I pressed, noticing a maturity in him that took me aback. "You don't understand, Dad," he challenged. "I might know more than you think, son," I countered, trying to keep a reassuring smile. "Then why don't you do something about it, Dad?" he pushed. "Why do you let them get away with it?" Wait, this wasn't what I expected. It seemed like we were talking about something else entirely. "Get away with what, son?" I asked, bewildered. "You really don't know, Dad," he repeated. "Apparently not, son," I admitted. "It's Mom and Uncle Peter, Dad," he whispered. "When you're at work once a month or so, it's so embarrassing." "Uncle Peter," I muttered. "Peter wasn't Hannah's brother. He was married to another one of Hannah's sisters." "Oh, that," I mumbled, unable to think of anything else to say. "They've been doing it for years, Dad," Noah informed me solemnly. "Emma thinks I'm Peter's son, not yours." With that, he broke down in tears, and I wrapped my arms around him to comfort him. It had been so long since I held him, and I was surprised by how strong he had become. "I can guarantee you, Noah," I assured him, holding him close, "you are my son in every way, not Peter's." "How do you know, Dad?" he sobbed. "How can you be sure?" "I'm sure, son," I told him confidently. "Believe me, I'm sure." We talked for a while longer without revealing too much, but enough to reassure him. I managed to convince Noah that he was truly my son, and it felt like a huge burden had been lifted from his shoulders. But I hadn't yet touched on the fact that my brother might be the father of Emma and Alex. The illusion of my perfect family was shattered. Both Emma and Alex were aware of their mother's affair with their uncle, but they chose to ignore it, unsure of how to handle the situation. It was an unbearable position for them to be in. Peter was the youngest of Hannah's sister's husbands and undeniably the most attractive. While Hannah had her own allure, Peter's presence added a complicated dynamic to my already strained marriage. A few days later, I took all three kids out for lunch and faced the hardest task of my life. I disclosed everything I had discovered. I spent the day in a state of anxiety, fearing their reactions. Surprisingly, they handled the news relatively well. Emma shed some tears, and Alex sat silently, head in his hands, clearly upset. Despite the initial shock, they all expressed a desire to confront their mother immediately. I convinced them to wait, explaining that I needed to sort out a few things first. They all pledged their love and loyalty to me and were ready to cut ties with Hannah. I managed to calm them, reminding them that despite her mistakes, she had always been a caring mother. I spoke about her more kindly than I felt, especially after hearing what the kids had to say. According to them, Hannah had been involved with her brother-in-law Peter for a while. However, it was likely not long enough for him to be Noah's father. The claim of a once-a-month rendezvous might have been an exaggeration, but none of us were sure. One thing was clear: the kids felt a sense of relief sharing their burden. We all shed tears that evening, including Alex. I was consumed with a desire for revenge, but I needed a way to seek it without hurting my children. Yes, I chose my words carefully. I needed revenge not just for myself, but for my kids too. I pondered various schemes but couldn't come up with anything grand. A direct confrontation seemed inevitable. Fortunately, there was an upcoming event where I could do just that, the 10th of December. Our family had gathered, as families do. With my parents gone, Aaron and I were among the older generation. That night, 39 of us sat down for a celebratory dinner, mostly Hannah's family and some mutual friends. The food was probably good, but to me it tasted like cardboard. Then came the speeches. Here we go, I thought. Was this the end or just the beginning? I was sweating, trying to calm my nerves. What I had to do wouldn't be easy, but it had to be done. "Welcome, everyone." I began with small talk before steering the conversation towards celebrating 20 years of marriage with Hannah. But there were some very personal things I needed to share. Laughter filled the room with a few jokes about our love life. Hannah blushed, thinking it was all in good fun. They had no idea what was coming. As the laughter died down, Emma stood up abruptly, followed by Alex and Noah. Without a word, they walked out, leaving the whole table bewildered. "Come back here, all three of you!" Hannah exclaimed, jumping up. "Don't be disrespectful to your father." Only Alex glanced back at her with a sad shake of his head before joining his siblings outside. "Ryan, do something," Hannah pleaded, desperate for me to intervene. "Tell them to come back right now. It's all right, dear," I responded firmly. "They already know what I'm going to say, and since it concerns them, maybe it's best they're not here." Hannah looked shocked at my response, first surprised by my defiance, then worried as she tried to understand my motives. "Sit down, Hannah," I commanded, my tone leaving no room for argument. "As I was saying," I continued, scanning the faces around me, "I've had 20 years of what I thought was a perfect marriage until a few weeks ago." I paused, feeling the tension in the air. Some looked puzzled, others still wore smiles, expecting a joke, but many seemed concerned. "Imagine my shock," I continued, "to discover that Emma, my beloved daughter, is not biologically mine." Hannah couldn't hold back her sobs, her hands covering her face. "Would you like to tell everyone who Emma's real father is, Hannah?" I asked. But she remained silent, her crying the only sound. "Fine, then," I pressed on. "Does anyone else want to confess who's been with my wife behind my back?" No one spoke, and I stood there, my gaze sharp and accusing, scanning the stunned faces of family and friends. As terrible as it sounds, there was a strange satisfaction in exposing those who had deceived me. They had no idea how much I had uncovered. I couldn't resist giving my brother Aaron a stern look, and he visibly squirmed under my gaze, knowing he had been caught. "No one's going to confess?" I challenged. "Do I have to reveal the truth, then?" To my surprise, Claire stood up abruptly. "It's not what you think, Ryan," she exclaimed, distressed. "It wasn't an affair. We just had relations a few times to help Hannah get pregnant." The whole family wanted a boy, especially my mother, and it seemed doubtful that I could father a child. If someone had dropped a feather at that moment, it would have knocked me over. Claire knew. She knew about her husband, my brother, fathering my children. Looking around the table, I saw it divided into two camps. Some were shocked, while others seemed unsurprised, friends who were unaware and family members who mostly seemed to be in the loop. As I stood there trying to collect myself, friends began to excuse themselves one by one, leaving around 17 or 18 of us, all relatives. "Why don't you go play over there?" suggested Olivia, another of Hannah's sisters. And gradually, the younger children were sent away. Even the teenagers were encouraged to leave, but they seemed glued to the scene, unwilling to miss the drama. "Well, you all seem to know what's going on, don't you?" I exclaimed, looking around the room. "You're all aware of this mess, except maybe the kids here." A couple of husbands appeared confused, but nobody denied it. "Look, Ryan," my brother attempted to explain, "it's not what you think, I swear." He seemed poised to say more, but my expression of pure anger silenced him instantly. "So you all knew that Aaron slept with my wife and fathered Emma, huh?" I demanded of the table. Nobody admitted it outright, but again, nobody denied it. "I swear it was just 3 times, Ryan," Claire defended herself, her voice rising. "Whose ridiculous idea was this anyway?" I shouted angrily, my frustration growing. Once again, nobody dared to speak, but too many eyes shifted toward Martha, my mother-in-law. "I should have known," I muttered, acknowledging her role. "Thanks a lot, Mom," I said to her with a heavy heart. "Your desperation for a son has shattered my marriage." "No," Hannah finally intervened, her voice trembling. "Please, Ryan, don't say that. I can't imagine life without you. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive one mistake?" "One mistake?" I echoed incredulously. "Just one mistake?" "Yes, honey," Hannah pleaded tearfully. "It was only that one time." It seems so foolish now, but back then, Mom's plan made sense. "And what about Alex?" I pressed her, my tone firm. "He's yours, of course, Ryan," she assured me. "Wrong," I corrected her sternly. "I've had a DNA test done, and his father is the same man as Emma's." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. "What are you saying, Ryan?" Claire exclaimed in shock. "You heard me, Claire," I confirmed, not backing down. "If my dear brother there is Emma's father, then he's also Alex's father." Silence hung heavily in the air as this revelation sank in. "You scoundrel!" Claire snapped at her husband, her voice trembling with anger. "You promised me this wouldn't happen, and then you went off and slept with that woman again." "I'm so sorry," Aaron muttered, avoiding eye contact, clearly regretting his actions. "And you traitor!" Claire yelled at Hannah, her voice seething with anger. "I agreed to let you have my husband just that one time, and then you continued sleeping with him." With that, she marched 3 steps toward her sister and slapped Hannah hard across the face. "You deceitful hag!" she spat, striking Hannah repeatedly until someone intervened and pulled her away. Tears streamed down Claire's face as she was restrained. "Are you satisfied, Mom?" I demanded, glaring at Martha, but she remained expressionless. "So who else has been betraying me?" I challenged the room, locking eyes with Peter, who sat across from me. "You scoundrel!" Olivia screamed beside me, shocking me with her outburst. "It's true what they said. You did sleep with her that night at the party." Confusion filled the air as Olivia turned to her husband, Daniel, who sheepishly admitted to the accusation. "And you, my dear sister?" Olivia turned her fury toward Hannah. "Have you slept with all your brother-in-laws, you shameless woman?" "Well, she certainly had her way with Peter over there," I interjected, a sense of satisfaction creeping in. Peter's feeble attempts to deny the accusations only fueled the chaos, leading to Olivia delivering a swift blow to his nose. "Don't bother coming home tonight," she yelled at him. "In fact, don't ever come back." Isabella unleashed her fury on Aaron. "I'm divorcing you, and I never want to lay eyes on you again." The 3 upset sisters linked arms and headed for the door. "You're no sister of ours," they yelled back at Hannah as they stormed out. "Feeling pleased now, Martha?" I confronted my mother-in-law, but she remained stoic, staring straight ahead as Hannah continued to cry into her arms. Finally, my father-in-law, Mark, spoke up. "I'm sorry, Ryan," he began, his voice heavy with regret. "If only I had known." He trailed off, unable to find the right words, but he was the only one who made any attempt at an apology. Then my brother Aaron approached me, his hand outstretched, a look of profound shame on his face. "Ryan," he stammered. "Ryan, what can I say?" "Nothing, you scoundrel," I retorted, my words lacking real force. I swung at him, catching him on the chin with little strength, yet the timing was perfect, and he stumbled backward, tripping over a chair and landing sprawled on the floor, making no effort to rise. That seemed to mark the end of the festivities as the atmosphere soured, draining the fun out of the evening. Hannah didn't return home that night, and after grabbing a few things, she never came back. The kids were adamant about not speaking to her for a while. Despite my own feelings of hatred towards her, I had to prioritize the well-being of the kids. Eventually, they softened and allowed her back into their lives, but things were never the same. I remained dad while she became more like a distant figure. The family was torn apart. 2 of the sisters who left that night filed for divorce, leaving only Olivia to stick with Aaron. However, she gave him a rough time, believing in giving him a taste of his own medicine. Olivia showed up a couple of nights later when the kids were out, and her intentions quickly became clear. Whether it was revenge or a way to get back at Aaron, I never found out, but I certainly got my payback. There was no love or tenderness. It was just a physical frenzy for hours. It felt strange, like being intimate with my wife, but different. Afterward, she thanked me and left. It was only months later that I discovered she had been doing the same with Aaron's friends. Would their marriage survive this? I didn't have a clue, and honestly, it wasn't my concern, but I could imagine it being pretty rough for my brother. About 3 weeks later, one of Hannah's other sisters, the attractive one, gave me a call and asked me out for dinner. I agreed, and we went out, had a meal, chatted, flirted, kissed, and ended up in bed. However, this time it felt different. After the initial excitement, we shared a deeper connection, making love reminiscent of the early days with Hannah. I couldn't fathom why Peter had strayed from his marriage, but it definitely wasn't due to any lack of desire for intimacy. Perhaps the sweetest twist was when Martha's long-suffering husband, Mark, had enough of her meddling. He bought a 40-foot yacht and spent the rest of his days sailing around Europe. It was quite convenient for me and the kids. We often joined him for sailing trips, exploring places like the south of France, Malta, and the Canary Islands, creating cherished memories. Emma crossed paths with a young Spaniard while sailing and eventually tied the knot with him. He hailed from a family that owned one of Europe's largest boat marinas, which turned out to be quite advantageous. As for the boys, they're taking their time and not rushing into marriage too soon, perhaps learning from their father's experience. They've got plenty of time ahead of them. As for me, I don't have much contact with Hannah, but the kids keep me updated. Apparently, she's taking life one day at a time and often inquires about me. I just nod in response. Oh, and as for my own love life, I'm considering giving marriage another shot, but this time I'm looking inward. There's a mutual affection between us, but we're both a bit cautious. Time will tell. I want to be certain that I'm not getting married, partly out of spite toward Hannah. Although I must admit the thought of her reaction if I did tie the knot again brings a smile to my face.